Hi friends, my name is Emily and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be sharing with you my August reading wrap-up. I don't want to be dramatic, but I feel like the second half of August has actually been like the worst experience I have had in my life thus far. There wasn't a lot of reading happening. The first thing that I read in August was The 4 Quartets by T.S. Eliot. So this is a series of 4 poems published over 6 years between 1936 and 1942. They're interlinked meditations on humanness and our relationship with time. They also get quite religious. And so the reason that I read this is because I reread The End We Start From by Megan Hunter for my Patreon live stream, and this book actually starts with the T.S. Eliot quotation, "What we call the beginning is often the end, and to make an end is to make a beginning. The end is where we start from." And so the title comes from that, and I thought, obviously, if I am hosting this live show, we're going to talk about this framing piece by T.S. Eliot, where the title comes from, where the text is framed from. It would be important to read The 4 Quartets. I mean, I think it was good for the live show. I don't think it was like fun, pleasurable reading. I have to say it's not my typical jam, but in terms of like building, understanding, building analysis of this text, I would recommend it. And you can find it for free online if you happen to have picked up The End We Start From. I think I mentioned this at the end of my July wrap-up, and I wasn't really sure what to do with this, and I wanted to come back and update my thoughts, and I feel like a lot of my thoughts still sort of stand. This book is more of a mood than any sort of specific plot. I think the more you think about it, the less appealing our unnamed main character is. She is kind of a wet blanket, possibly in an abusive relationship. Her husband R leaves her, abandons her twice. Once before the birth of their child, because he wants to go camping. He wants like one last night of freedom, and so she's alone with 2 of his friends. When she gives birth, we learn that it took, I think, 2 years of them trying to conceive and her going through the trauma of having miscarriages and failing to conceive for him to agree to go to the doctor, which doesn't seem like something that a supportive partner would do. She doesn't have friends until he leaves, so the apocalypse basically has happened. There's been climate change related flooding in London, and there are now climate refugee camps. They are in the refugee camp as a family until he can't handle it anymore. He doesn't want to be around people and in this new world, and so he pieces out to find a better place, and he never comes back. It's only after he leaves that other women in the camp start to talk to her and she makes friends. It's definitely worth discussing. I think it's a good book club book, just in terms of how vague it is. I feel like it's open to a lot of discussion, a lot of interpretation. I think I actually bumped this down on the reread. I moved this down to 2 stars from 3 stars on my first read. Once I started thinking about it and thinking about the female character and how limited this is, in terms of the role of women, and the specific representation of a woman that we have here. I really didn't enjoy that, but I do think if you want something short and quick that gets people talking, that you could span from the more like popular fiction side of things, because it is quite an easy read, or you could go much more literary by looking at T.S. Eliot and the inspiration there and how that's working here. I think it might make a good sort of broad book club book, but I think just for shits and giggles by yourself, I wouldn't recommend this one. So those are the first 2 things that I read in August. They dialogued nicely with each other, intentionally, obviously. And then I moved on to The Wolf and the Woodsman by Ava, I'm gonna pronounce it Ava, Reid. This I was super excited about. I had it on my wish list. It was in my little frame of view from before it even had a cover. Like, I heard about the premise and I was excited about this and I was keeping an eye on it. I was excited about it because of the Slavic folklore inspiration. Like, I'd heard it compared to Naomi Novik, I'd heard it compared to Catherine Arden. A lot of the books that I was hearing it compared to I really liked. However, The Wolf and the Woodsman ended up feeling really stale. It felt very YA, and I think that's largely because of the tropes. I'm not usually put off by too many tropes, but for some reason all of this really didn't work for me. We had enemies to lovers, the outsider becomes the chosen one sort of thing, like the person with no power discovers that they actually have a super secret special different power. Those two things I feel like we see a lot in YA fantasy, and it made it feel really YA. The 3 acts of the book felt really clunky. We spent too much time with Evike pining over the hunter. So we have this enemies to lovers. The hunters are the enemies of the pagans. Evike is a pagan who's been sacrificed by her village. She doesn't have magic, but the king wants to collect her because he thinks she has magic, and Gaspar is the person who's accompanying her from the woods to the kingdom. And they very quickly start like ogling each other and like, ooh, we can't do this, but we want to do this. I felt like that time in the woods was just super repetitious. Kiss already. Part of me wonders if this was YA, except for the ending, which feels really Game of Thrones in terms of exactly what happens. I feel like we definitely see that happen in Game of Thrones. Like, the thing that happens doesn't seem to be particularly unique. I think overall it just felt quite messy. So we have sort of fantasy equivalents of like a really orthodox Christian or Catholic sect. We have the pagans who are practicing the old ways, the old religions, the forest spirits, etc. And then we have the Jews. And so our main character is half pagan, half Jewish. They don't call them Jews, but they're the Jews. Overall, I was just underwhelmed. I think I wanted much more from this, given the comparisons to Naomi Novik and Catherine Arden, and this didn't deliver. I think if this had maybe been YA and marketed as YA instead of adult fantasy, I might have been more lenient on it, because I feel like YA is often a little more trope heavy, because it's the introduction, right? It's the baby step into adult fantasy would be to read something like this before you move on to adult fantasy. So I find YA can be more tropey and I'm much more willing to accept it, whereas fantasy, I want them to push boundaries, and this just didn't do it. I finished that on August 13th. That was the last book I finished for a very long time, and I gave it 3 out of 5 stars, but the more that it's percolated, the more that it's sitting there, I don't think it deserves from me. A 3 out of 5 stars is like a good rating. Like, yeah, something didn't work in it for me. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't great, but it's okay. I would recommend it. I don't know that I would recommend this. I think I might bump this down to 2 stars, which is a eh. And then the last book that I read in August was for the Journey to the Tower Patron Book Club. We read the final book in the Dark Tower series together, a chunker of a novel to read while everything fell apart. I can't say much about this because it's the final book in a very, by this point, intricate series, and I feel like to say too much would be to ruin a lot for anyone thinking of starting the series. It was a great way to sort of wrap up August and to read something that I knew I was going to enjoy, that I knew I was going to get to talk about and have a lot of fun talking about with other people who love this world, love these characters. It was a beautiful cherry on top of an otherwise very shitty month. Oh, I forgot. I just flipped the page and I realized that I forgot about another book. I finished one more book. This I finished on August 28th. I gave this 5 out of 5 stars, which I think is actually bumping it up from my previous reread. I think I loved this more on this reread. I loved it even more because it was something beautiful and like life-giving and happy-making. If you are thinking at all about starting the Dark Tower series, you've heard it around, I've seen a couple of booktubers read the first one together and they talked about it. If you're thinking about doing it, it's definitely worth it. It gets better. The Gunslinger is easily the worst book in the series. You only really appreciate it and come to like it after you've made it to the tower, you've made it to the ending, and you have some sort of attachment to this character that starts out very prickly and unappealing. If you are thinking about it, you've tried starting The Gunslinger, I would recommend giving it another shot. I think with every book after The Gunslinger, it just gets better and better. And then the book that I forgot about, which is a good sign, Catherine House by Elisabeth Thomas. So this is, I think, something that I heard talked about in some sort of dark academia video or book list. I put it on my library holds list, completely forgot that I'd done that because the wait list was eons long, and all of a sudden I got a notification being like, hey, you want to read this still? And I said yes. So this is sort of a gothic suspense novel set in this wacky experimental private college in the States. So the students commit to 4 years of isolation from the real world. So like no phones, they don't get to keep their own clothes, no movies, whatever. Everything is provided on campus, uniforms for the season, food, alcohol, and they're studying. And it's this kind of experiment that seems to work out. A lot of really famous politicians and such have gone to this school, and our main character Inez ends up at this school. We're not really sure why, because she doesn't seem to be particularly motivated. She spends a lot of time partying and sleeping around and not doing the classwork, to the point that she's almost kicked out, and then she's sort of enticed to stay and things get darker and weirder. I have to say that this novel really doesn't have a plot. It has a beautiful gothic atmosphere. If you really like sort of a campus vibe, cozy novel, if you like culty vibes, that's definitely all here. If you like plot, that's really not here. And you can see that reflected in the Goodreads reviews as well. Some people are like, oh my gosh, the atmosphere. I just loved luxuriating in the words, in the vibes. And other people are like, where is the fucking plot? This is a waste of my time. Nothing happens. And both are true. So depending on what type of reader you are, this could be very hit and miss for you. It ended up being a little bit middle of the road. I appreciated the academic vibes. I appreciated the isolation and the claustrophobia of being on a campus, an isolated campus at that. I also think that there's maybe just too much weird shit that doesn't go anywhere, that doesn't lead to anything, like the complete lack of plot, character development, etc. is also sort of unsatisfying, and I'm glad I borrowed this from the library because it's not something that I would ever reread, I think. I'm looking at some of the dark academia stuff now, and I feel like what appeals to me about dark academia as somebody who spent a lot of time in the academic setting and would love to go back to the university setting is that sort of cozy, insular feeling of like a close-knit cohort. You're already in a campus, which is like an isolated pocket in a larger space, right? Like there's something very appealing and cozy about the academic setting for myself, and it's something that I enjoy revisiting because I love that experience so much. Like I loved university, I loved going to school. There's nothing to me that is super appealing about rereading Catherine House, whereas some of the other dark academia books that I have read do have that appeal. Like I think Normal People comes up as a dark academia text a lot, and it has a lot of stuff in common, right? Like sex, relationships, the isolation of being in university, of being in a small closed campus, right? But the characters develop, and the characters are appealing, and they're why you come back, whereas I don't find Inez and her backstory and her arc, huge scare quotes around that because nothing really happens, appealing. I think that's the difference in terms of rereadability for myself, is that I don't care enough about Inez to follow her through the vibes again. Like the vibes are fine for one time. So if you're interested in sort of a culty, spooky, dark academia, gothic vibes novel, I would say check this out, but maybe borrow it from the library because I'm not sure how rereadable it is. Those are the books that I read in August, and what an August it was. Thank God it's over. Currently, I am reading Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde by Robert Louis Stevenson for the Patron Drop-In Book Club. We will be meeting on September 18th. I figured Jekyll and Hyde would be a good way to get into some fall spooky reading. It's in public domain, so you don't have to buy anything. All you have to do is become a patron if you are interested in the live show. I'm excited. I'm excited for the autumnal spooky vibes. I'm ready for it. It fits with where I am at. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you again soon. Bye.